Hello and welcome to the Volleycast. I am your host, Joe Trinzi, and on the other line, more beautiful than a 5-to-5 float serve forcing a medium pass. It's David Hunt.
What's up, Joe? That's rather specific, oddly specific.
Hey, it's all about winning volleyball. It's not glamorous.
Yeah, I got you.
Unlike this beautiful Volleycast background that I have going on, that is extremely glamorous. Is this like the most amateur podcasting thing ever to throw this background up? Do I look like a total?
No, I think it's actually pretty advanced. Amateur would be just having you with your kitchen or whatever behind you. I think that shows a little tech savvy, which is cool.
Okay, I like it. I was a technical coordinator once upon a time. So
I was gonna say, so you're expected to know all the ins and outs of anybody's computer problems, mainly just Outlook issues and email. But
that's like the worst thing when you have any sort of job relating to technical is you're automatically assumed to
computer expert.
I know. I'm really not a computer expert. Well, whatever.
But you know what? You know enough to get the job done.
And that's all that matters. And speaking of getting the job done, this doesn't really have anything to do with that, but let's talk about our premium webinars that we have coming up. We got Alfie Reft on Saturday. We're recording this on Monday the 6th. We'll air it on the morning of the 7th. As of right now, there's 3 more spots left for Alfie's clinic. So by the time you hear this, there may still be a spot open. So if you're interested in catching him, we're talking about teaching and training defense on Saturday. You can sign up for there on scoutvb.com. And our next one is locked in. It's going to be Dan Fisher, head coach of Pitt. He's done an awesome job turning that program into a powerhouse. And we're going to talk about attacking, similar in the vein to the webinars that we've done with Chris Tamas that we're going to talk about in a second and Tom Black. But he's going to focus more on the attacking and get into some of the stuff like how you need to train hitters and all that. Like our webinar with Chris that we're going to talk about today, we talked about offense, but more from the setter's end. So Dan, we're going to talk about more from the attacking end, and excited for that. I've been him and I for the last year and a half, have been trying to work out a live event and just kind of get the weekends to match up. So now that we're all stuck at home, now it's a little easier, it's getting more free. So you can, again, go on scoutvb.com and check that out. And speaking of the webinars, we had one on this past Friday, a couple days ago, with Chris Tamas, head coach for Illinois. And we really just kind of broke down setting, got to hear a lot of his thoughts. And, Dave, what were some of your initial impressions of it?
Yeah, there were lots. Chris, his demeanor is so calm and relaxed, right? I was listening to it and I was ready to just, it was like a mellow Zen sort of deal. It was pretty cool. Yeah. But, I think the last 2 premium webinars that you've done have been awesome, and they've been so distinctly different in lots of ways. And it was cool. Tom was very clear cut on what he wanted to do and how he wanted to do it. And he was going to train a very specific way, and his team and system was clearly defined. And you heard Chris a few times just sort of say, well, we're going to see, or, he's not this coach that we have to be on this step. And so I thought that was pretty interesting, because as you try to develop speed, there's lots of ways or lots of areas where things can go haywire, as you've probably seen. And how do you define that, or how do you identify that is something that it looks like Chris just gives his athletes a lot of latitude to go out there and just be athletes and figure out their own solutions. So I thought that was pretty cool.
I thought it tied into a little bit of what we talked about with explicit and implicit learning in terms of how much of it needs to be top-down directed and how much of it learn from trial and error. We talked a lot in the webinar about running with speed. It was interesting because Chris said, I'm not married to running a fast offense, or I'm not, it doesn't have to be, but that just kind of worked out well for his personality, especially in 2018 when they made their Final Four run. They had a really fast offense, and particularly really fast back row attacking offense. Probably, arguably probably the best, or certainly I would almost say the most high level back row attacking we've seen out of the women's game, just in terms of how fast they were running it and how integrated it was. Not just, I don't need to sound this dismissive of some other great back row attack, but not just throwing up a loopy or set out of the back row to a dominant hitter.
Yeah.
For example, Stanford was doing with Cat Plummer. That sounds like kind of, I mean, that's what you should do. Like, so they were absolutely doing the right thing, but it was
Right.
just finding the way for their hitter to have like this, kind of let their hitter take over. And that was really good. Whereas like Illinois, they just had like a little more complexity to it. You don't get bonus points for complexity, but I think coaches are drawn to, it feels like, okay, I could out coach, like, I mean, which can be a trap, right? Like,
Right.
this more complicated way to do it, I can give my team the edge. But it was interesting kind of Chris talk about like kind of how that evolved,
Right. What the thing that I thought was awesome was there was a very congruent way of thinking for him, very logical way of thinking, right? It started, and he didn't necessarily lay this all out in order, but it had to do, started with, how good are we at passing the ball? And if we can't pass the ball to the point where we're in system more than we're out of system, then we shouldn't spend a ton of time training this, right? And then he took into account the capability of his setter. Was his setter able to go fast? And did they need to go fast? And was that going to maximize their hitters? And it just, everything made sense, even to the point where he was talking about his outside hitters approaches. He wasn't going to do this long 4-step approach where his outside hitter, he'd do it on your screen, but where his outside hitter was going to be far away from the net if he was telling his setters to air it tighter, right? So just we can sit here and be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But a lot of times in our own coaching, I think sometimes we're, hey, well, this is what we're going to do. And then all of a sudden when we start thinking about it from a systematic framework, it's like, yeah, but these two don't line up, right? We're not going to preach, set the ball off and do all these things, but our approaches are shorter or vice versa. Right? So I thought that was really interesting.
I mean, that is one of these sort of things that doesn't have an answer when it comes to coaching, because you can make a mistake on either way. You can make a mistake by being too dogmatic, too systematic, and then you can make a mistake by being like too loose and too free and all of that.
Yeah.
I think volleyball coaches in general tend to be, well, it's interesting. I think lower level coaches, I've had kind of this opportunity where I interact with a lot of coaches at a lot of different like levels and experience levels and all that. I think that like, I'll say quote unquote, like lower level coaches, maybe just coaches a little less experienced, maybe they're not professional coaches, maybe they don't, something like that. They probably by far tend to be they don't have a way to do everything.
Gotcha.
They don't have like they tend to like they need more order and more structure. And for example, like, when we do our gold medal square clinics, those are geared towards having a very specific way to do everything. And to me, the way that I kind of view that is like, okay, if you are going to really learn how to cook, you got to start with a recipe. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
If you've never baked anything before, or you've never made any of that particular dish, you have to start with like a recipe. You can't just like maybe derive that from scratch.
Right.
But ultimately, if you want to be like a really good cook, you kind of have to learn how to modify based on, like this, I don't know, whatever, this stove runs a little hotter or slower, or this particular ingredient has a little bit of a different thing, all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of what I look at is like beginning coaches like need that structure. But then I really do think you see like these great coaches, and part of me, I think is like they have the fundamentals so ingrained. And this is where it goes back to a little bit of that conversation we we're talking about with Strick, with some talking about like advanced players. They have some of these fundamentals so ingrained that a lot of times when you talk to them about what creates their success, they don't even mention it because it's like talking about like breathing.
Right.
It's like, why do I even have to mention it?
Right. Yeah. Or Tom kept saying it like, hey, I'm not telling you something that you don't already know. When it's, you want to take a step back.
Like, Tom, most people don't know this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Like that. Yeah. And so to you, what's common sense isn't common sense to everybody. And I think you got to remember that as you're talking to your athletes, right? Is we can't ever assume anything, right? Because everyone's background is so different. And the short story is in 2013, when we were in Japan coaching the Japanese team, we're trying to talk about passing and keeping your arms straight and getting your platform established early. But most of these guys had a background of never facing a 6'10", 6'11" outside hitter driving a jump serve down at them, right? So they didn't have the need to get their platform established early because most of their experience or most of their what they've gone through was not that. So when we were trying to teach some of these principles or some of these things, they weren't connecting, right? So we were assuming that these guys had the same background of thought or background of information, right? And it took some tough learning moments to be able to talk about that, or to understand or come to a common understanding. So I think knowing the background of your athletes is important.
And I think this is a good segue. And for those of you guys that don't know David's background, another one of his coaching experiences is you were assistant coach for the Japanese men's national team at one time. And talk to us about what you guys are doing offensively and sort of like establishing an offense there, because that was a topic, a thread of conversation with Chris Tamas was like, okay, how did this 2018 offense, which is really fast, kind of complex offense, like how did that come? Did you just like design that from scratch? And he was basically talking about how it kind of evolved naturally. So I'm kind of curious as to like, how did you get started there?
Yeah, I mean, Japan specifically, right? You sit down and you get there, and most of these guys, I don't even know how to pronounce their names, right? I'm struggling. I don't know who they are. But you look in the gym and everyone is 6'5" or under. And all of a sudden you're thinking, well, where are all the tall guys, right? And most of our college teams had guys that were bigger, that could hit faster serves, right? It was a hard thing to get guys to hit serves over 100 kilometers an hour, which is what, 64, 65? Yeah, where I think most top-level college teams, last year we make it to the Final Four in the NCAA, and most of our servers are serving over 65 miles an hour. I think maybe our setter was the only one. He was in a float serve. So all of a sudden, and Joe, you touched on it a lot, and in college, you can sort of design your team based on recruiting. And I think the best coaches have a vision for the players they want to recruit, how that fits into what they can coach, and then ultimately the teams that they produce. But national teams, you have who you have. So all of a sudden looking at our team, how are we going to beat the Netherlands? How are we going to beat Russia? How are we going to beat the US? And one of the ways we had to do it was we had to control the ball with our platform. So defense and serve receive, and then be able to go to the pins fast, and then be able to run something out of the middle. Now, what did the middle of the court look like? Well, we set a lot more big than we did quick. And then we would utilize movement versus just power and running right at you to be able to exploit our quick. But our quick did not get a lot of sets. We threw a lot more to the big, hoping that the pin guys would have to release, knowing that the speed was coming both directions to our pin. So the ultimate one, the conversations we were having was, how fast, what is like that critical tempo? Well, we need to have it fast enough that they're not able to get a well-formed block on us. We know that having two blockers there is significantly going to impact our ability to score. So what stops that from happening? And then the ability to hit that ball with range, right? So each hitter independently, how fast is too fast for them? Well, they all of a sudden become shot committed because of the tempo, and how can we expand that range? And then, the age-old question, well, what can we train? And then what is sort of, hey, that hitter, that's just who he is. And I think as a coach, that's the coaching art right there, right? Is you got to train and hope that you can give them the skills to be able to hit multiple shots or a variety of shots. And then at the end of the day, they're going to have to compete with what they have. So infusing them with the confidence to go into battle with the tools that they have, knowing that can get it done.
That's kind of interesting. You're talking about the hitters, and this reminds me of another little conversational thread that went on in the webinar, was about what do you think that there is sort of like an archetype for a hitter that does well with a faster offense and a hitter that does well on a slower offense? Or do you think it's, you know what I mean? Like, is there a physical?
Yeah, I think back to a few players that we've had most recently. I think in general, players that are successful in volleyball have good arms. And what does a good arm mean? It means that it has fast turnover in their elbow. They can go from that loaded position to unloading their arm real quickly. And they can generate a lot of velocity and power with that. Now, the reason they have more success is because they can typically score when the pass isn't perfect, so they can score out of system. And then serving wise, at least in the men's game, they can generate a lot of velocity from the service line. So somebody with a good arm tends to be one of the characteristics that we see at a higher level. Now, I think it all comes down to, we had a guy that was conference player of the year 2 years in a row, and he preferred to hit a set that was probably like his first set, right? So he was on his right foot when the ball was in the setter's hands, but he had range better than anybody in the country and could score with 2 and 3 blockers consistently. So speed wasn't really a factor for him because his hitting efficiency didn't drop with more blockers up. So
do you tend to think like, I think some coaches are like, okay, like a smaller, more athletic hitter does well with a faster offense, or like, and like a taller, slower hitter does well with a slower set? Like, do you think there's truth to that?
There might be some truth to it, but there might be some truth to it because of when a smaller, more athletic, quote unquote, more athletic player has had to have success growing up, right? That is typically, a way to score is to beat the block versus having to hit over the block.
Yeah.
So I think it's probably state dependent, right? When they were younger, what was the environment like for them to have success?
Yeah. To a degree, I think that sometimes running like, height helps with running fast, because,
Right.
if you imagine if you had a player that was 9 feet tall, they wouldn't even need to jump. They could just stand in net and you could set them the fastest set ever, and they could club it down. So I don't know. I go a little two ways about that. And sometimes hitters that are a little smaller, they can kind of hang on, hang and disrupt the timing a little bit. So, I mean, if you think about the fastest running middles, it's nice to have a tall middle because they're easier to find on a faster set. Sometimes a smaller middle, hang it so they can use their jump. But, but I think there's, to a degree, also what you kind of said about the arm swing style, and I think like some of those so you have some hitters who can develop a lot of power, but it's a little bit of like a longer arm swing, like a little bit of a longer, loopier arm swing. And sometimes struggle to get on a really fast set. And I don't know, I think arm swing is one of the hardest things to change, especially if you're talking about once they're already in college.
Yep. No, and that
really changed.
I agree with that. And that's something that we started to track, and Chris touched on it a little bit. Chris was talking about year to year, and I don't know the women's game too well, so I don't know what years were what really. It sounded like they had a lot of success in 2018, so maybe that was the year they went up to the Final Four. But we noticed that within the year, a passer does not drastically improve in terms of their in-system pass percentage in men's volleyball in the 132 days that we get. Does not go from 55% in system to 70% in system.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah, in 1 year. And that's maybe I suck as a coach, but just over the year, passers don't tend to drastically increase like that. But we do see a change from freshman year to senior year. So I think keeping that in mind, right, is, hey, this year, and there's a reason that veteran teams do better, right? Like, you played more volleyball at that level. So I think you have to understand that as well, right? Where am I going to get the most return within the season? So, to start the season, serving and passing is important, but, if I invest 100 hours in this guy's passing, how much better is he going to get versus if I invest 100 hours in out of system attacking, or if I invest, 30 hours here and 30 hours there, and then maybe I'm getting a little bit better in more areas. So I think
it's funny that actually, as you're saying that, what makes me, it just makes me wonder also a little bit of the value of like taking a break. Like, I wonder if there's going to be some players that are going to come back after this break and actually like be better or be able to make breakthroughs. Because the one thing I do think about training, like in general, like training, and especially training in this organized setting the way we tend to do it, sometimes I don't think it makes players much, I don't know how to say this, but like, it doesn't necessarily make them better, but it definitely makes them more stable or makes them more consistent, for example. So you're talking about like passers tend to not get better. And because if you think about like the way kind of training is, like it's shaping, it's trying to kind of like eliminate the outlier behaviors, and you kind of just you get in your groove. But what's the classic saying? Like a really deep groove is a rut, So that makes me, makes you think of that with passing, you know what I mean? Like, especially passing, which is like, I don't know, maybe just more like this than others, is like, it's hard to get out of your habits. And then sometimes I wonder, like, when players go away for a little bit, if that's where some improvement happens, because they maybe detrain a little bit. So then when they come back to training, there is some additional possibility for sort of like breakouts. It's actually
No,
interesting. Yeah.
that makes sense. Because, I mean, fatigue is a factor, right? We know that around week 5 or 6 within the men's season, we start to see a decrease in performance, and we have to tailor our coaching to that. And you started to talk to Chris about feedback over the season and in matches versus practice. And I definitely think, these are student athletes, right? There's a lot of stuff going on. So if you're a semester school, understanding when, midterms are, when finals are coming up, and how the ebbs and flows of that play into the fatigue of your athletes, and tailoring your feedback to those athletes, I think is really important. And at the end of the day, one of the things we like about going fast is it gives us this idea to shoot for, right? So at the end of the year, if we can go this fast and be really efficient, that's awesome. But then there's going to be a window about 6-7 weeks in where it's all right, here's our ideal, but here's where we're actually at, and what's going to be best for us to still get to this point. And sometimes we got to recalibrate, and sometimes that's refreshing for the athletes, right? So that we're not just for 100 days in a row just talking about, hey, be on your right foot, slow to fast, small to big, and sort of gives us something else to focus on.
Yeah. Have you ever done anything like what Chris was talking about? Basically, like in 2017, they basically had like kind of 2 different tempos for their go. Like they kind of had like a set play on the free ball or maybe a perfect pass, and they're calling go or calling shoot. And then otherwise they would just sort of call go. And then in 2018, the shoot tempo was basically just always their tempo.
Yeah.
Have you done anything? I thought that was interesting. And then he kind of just said he didn't really plan it like that. He just kind of evolved that way.
Yeah.
Have you ever had anything like that?
Yeah. I mean, we talk about it, just going back to that, like congruent thinking just makes sense. If a go is on our second step, what do we call it when we're on our third step? And what do we call it when we're on our first step? So we have 3 different calls for each of our pin and taps, and some guys are really good. We call it a shoot as well. That's a third step for us. Some guys are really good at that. Some guys will never hit that. Or once the season starts, just completely, hey, that's not where I have success, and that's fine, right? But understanding that, each guy's a little bit different. And then we've had matches, Joe, where some teams are really good at defending against a shoot for whatever reason. They can dig in, they can pop it up, they can defend it, touch it, slow it down, but they can't defend against a slower set. So having an athlete that you can sub in that runs a slower set, disrupts timing, all of a sudden now the blockers are on the way down and they can find success, I think helps your team. And we, in the last few years, there's been 1 or 2 matches where we said, hey, perfect pass, whatever it is, just call a go, which is second step. It's going to be a slower tempo, but hopefully there's a well-formed block there, and then we're just going to drive it off the edges and hope to score that way.
Yeah, you know what, and what this makes me think of, because I often like connect this back to just younger kids or less experienced players, because I think you can just see so much value in just that overall chain from like the least experienced players to the top.
Yep.
And high school players, for the most part, they have no idea what step they're on. They don't even know that that's a thing, that I should think about what step I'm on. They have never really thought about it. They just go hit it. And I hope so. What you end up with is like, they all, like high school, or I'm saying high school, it's just a broad class. They just live in this sort of muddy middle. They are too slow to really get on a true second step, true kind of shoot, kind of shoot set. But then they're too early when it's really out of system and needs to be a high ball. And one of the things that like a good high school team can really, or a good club team, in high school, they can really benefit from is like deliberate training of varying the tempo. Like really get on there and hit your second step and be fast, and then have some real high, and setters tend to kind of just set the same ball, slightly faster maybe in system and slightly higher out system. And setter, I mean, one of the things is like setters need to learn to put a high ball up high. I mean, that's one of the big things. I mean, I think it's actually a huge issue with women's volleyball is teams underset out of system balls.
Gotcha.
And then, if we see, even in talking about the Final Four and stuff like that, how many women's volleyball rallies they turn into pillow fights because you get these medium digs and the setter undersets it, and then the hitter has to chop it. And in terms of like putting up the high ball. And there's been so much success from teams being able to run fast. So you got to run fast. But then every now, like in certain situations, you can't underset your out of system balls. So having some variation, like for example, like what I was saying kind of with high school players is like, okay, go hit a true go where you're really on your second step. Now hit a true hut where you're like really waiting and rolling slowly into your first step, and do a couple of those variations,
Right.
and just really feeling the difference there, I think relates a lot. Or even things, I know we kind of, at least when I was on PEP, we would do this a little bit, like, if you have your outside hit some middle and have your middles hit some pin sets, a lot of guys want to do that anyway. And girls want to do that too, to some extent. But a lot of guys always want to mess around and play the other position. You know what I mean? Like your middle always wants to play opposite, or like your outside always wants to hit some quick or whatever. And feeling how you have to vary the tempos for that, I think, is valuable.
No, I agree. Actually, the idea behind some of this stuff had to do with a conversation that me and you had way back when, and you were talking about, you thought an evolution in offense would be perfect pass, somebody calling like a high ball, because all of a sudden your blockers want to kick out, and there's a natural rhythm to everything. And that actually has led us to a few training exercises that we do for blockers and offense, where perfect pass, they're running like a hut or a high ball where it's a 0 step or a first step set, and the blocker legitimately has to read the set out of the setter's hands. And it's difficult, and our hitters like to do it, right? And it's fun where all of a sudden now the very next pass, it's a perfect pass, they're calling a shoot, they're on their third step. And but I think that truly makes you have to read the game a little bit more, both from an attacker standpoint and a blocker standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, definitely from a blocking standpoint, 100% from a blocking standpoint, is like you try to see direction, speed, location, and speed is the hardest to really see.
Right.
Really blockers, a lot of times I wonder how much they really see the speed as opposed to like they're anticipating what the speed is going to be.
I think, what, John, I just agree with you. I think speed is easy to see, whether it's going forward or back, easier to see. I think location in system is hard to see, right? It's hard to pick up if that ball's going to die a few feet inside. I think that's why hitters, when you keep these sets inside, they can still have success, because these blockers a lot of times overrun these sets.
All right. We'll have to have a VolleyCast listener poll.
Ooh, all right. You know what? Maybe get a player on here.
Do you think speed is easier to see than location? That's sort of your thing.
I think, yeah, and maybe we might
direction is the
as we break it.
Direction is
What's up?
Set direction is the easiest. Front back, that's the easiest to read.
Correct. I think they're all difficult, but in the order of operations, I think that one you can check off first. I think speed, so in the men's game, if it's a gap 31, or if it's a go, I think the speed, you can start to pick that up, but I think location is really tough.
Yeah.
I think too many blockers get off the set too early and onto the hitter without knowing the true location.
Or then they don't see, they're just guessing at the location from where the hitters, or they're just running to a spot and they're just reaching in the air.
Yeah. So then an athletic hitter that jumps from outside and goes flying by you, a lot of times has some success, because you're not picking
blockers that run to a spot get beat by that hitter all the time.
Yeah.
All right. VolleyCast listener poll. Who do you agree with?
The Twitter poll. Throw up a Twitter poll and the four responses.
Throw up a Twitter poll. What's harder? Yeah. What's harder to read, speed or location?
Yeah.
All right. Okay. I think that's a good place to end it with our
perfect.
With our heated argument. It's getting
yeah. That's good. It keeps the friendship going, right? Just all right. I'll talk to you tomorrow. I'll see you.
Yeah. I'm hanging up on you.
Fair enough.
Yeah. But I think that was a good talk. And anybody who wants to, listen to more of the knowledge that Chris was dropping there that we talked a little bit about, you can purchase that webinar on scoutbb.com and check all that out. And we'll keep trying to have some more good podcasts. I've been slacking I haven't been every day the last week or so. I've only 4 or 5 in the last week, but I'll try to start picking them up. I'll stop slacking. So we'll put this out.
Well, Joe, the one thing is nobody has excuses anymore, right? Because everyone's got time. So the excuses are out the window. But you do have the ultimate excuse. You got a family. So I take that back.
I do, but like basically my wife makes it so that I have to do almost no real parenting. The extent of my parenting work is like playing with my daughter. And I'm like, oh,
Which is good
that's,
for your daughter, actually.
yeah. I was like, yeah, okay, this is really, really a hard thing to do. Okay, yeah, I'll just like play with my daughter. So yeah, I have especially no excuses because my wife is so great.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
And that's probably a good way to end it.
All right, buddy. Well, I appreciate you taking the time.
Cool. Likewise, Dave. We'll catch up a little bit later.
Sounds good. See ya.
Take care.